Imagine walking through a forest when every bird suddenly stops singing, and the people beside you freeze before you understand why. To a modern visitor, the silence might feel peaceful, but to ancient humans, it could mean a predator, strangers, or changing weather nearby. For most of human history, nature was not scenery surrounding daily life, because it was the only warning system people could depend on. There were no maps, road signs, weather reports, or emergency messages telling people where danger waited or where food could be found. Every broken branch, unfamiliar smell, distant call, and movement in the grass could contain information important enough to save a life. Ancient humans were not born with magical senses, and their eyes or ears were not fundamentally different from yours. What made them better at reading nature was the way they used those senses constantly from childhood until old age. A modern person can walk through a forest and simply see trees, while an experienced ancient hunter would see hundreds of connected signs. He might notice fresh scratches on bark, damp soil beneath leaves, frightened birds, and hoofprints leading toward hidden water. Each clue meant little by itself, but together they created a picture of what had recently happened and what might happen next. Ancient humans learned to recognize what was normal in their surroundings, which made even the smallest unusual change immediately noticeable. If insects normally filled the air with sound, sudden silence could warn that something large had entered the area. If grazing animals stared in one direction, hunters might understand that danger was moving where human eyes could not yet see. Even the wind carried information, bringing the smell of smoke, water, animals, plants, or unfamiliar people from far beyond the trees. To survive, ancient humans had to pay attention, because ignoring these clues could mean losing food, becoming lost, or walking directly into danger. Their attention was not divided by screens, messages, machines, and constant artificial noise competing for every moment of awareness. Most of what mattered was happening directly around them, so the natural world received their deepest and most continuous concentration. Children began learning these patterns long before they could hunt, simply by following adults and watching where experienced eyes looked. An elder might stop beside a footprint, touch its edge, study the soil, and explain which animal had passed and how recently. The child would later see the animal itself, connecting the invisible story in the ground with a real creature moving through the landscape. Through thousands of repeated moments, small observations became automatic, allowing people to notice danger without slowly analyzing every detail. This ability was strengthened by consequences, because a correct observation could lead to food, while a careless mistake could threaten the entire group. Nature rewarded accurate attention immediately, turning forests, rivers, grasslands, and mountains into classrooms, with lessons repeated every day. Ancient humans also shared what they discovered, so one person's experience could become knowledge used by children and future generations. Stories about predators, floods, poisonous plants, and hidden water preserved environmental lessons long after the original event had ended. Over time, communities built detailed mental maps filled not only with locations but with smells, sounds, seasons, tracks, and animal behavior. They did not control nature, but they became skilled at recognizing its patterns and adjusting their decisions before conditions became dangerous. The world around them was constantly speaking through footprints, feathers, wind, water, and silence, and survival depended on understanding its language. To see how deeply they could read this language, you must begin with the messages animals left behind on the ground. Animal tracks were among the clearest messages in nature, because every creature left behind a record of where it had been and how it moved. Ancient hunters learned to recognize animals from the shape of footprints, the number of toes, the depth of impressions, and the distance between steps. A wide track pressed deeply into mud could suggest a heavy animal, while smaller prints might reveal a younger member following behind. The direction of the toes showed where the animal traveled, but the surrounding ground revealed whether it moved calmly, quickly, or in fear. Long gaps between footprints could indicate running, while short, uneven steps might suggest injury, exhaustion, or an animal searching for food. Ancient humans also examined the edges of tracks, because sharp, clean outlines usually meant the animal had passed recently. Older footprints became softened by wind, rain, falling leaves, insects, and the movement of other creatures across the same path. Moist soil inside a print could reveal freshness, while dry dust settling into it suggested that more time had already passed. A tracker might press a finger into the nearby ground, comparing its moisture and firmness with the footprint left by the animal. Tracks were rarely followed alone, because broken grass, bent branches, disturbed stones, and scraped bark continued the story when footprints disappeared. A branch broken upward could suggest a large animal pushing through, while leaves crushed downward might reveal something moving close to the ground. Hair caught on bark or thorns helped identify the species, especially when the animal had rubbed against a tree or squeezed through a narrow space. Droppings provided even more information, including what the animal had eaten, how large it was, and how recently it had visited the area. Fresh droppings could still hold moisture or warmth, while older remains became dry, pale, broken, or covered by insects. Hunters also studied feeding marks, because teeth, claws, and beaks left different patterns on bones, fruit, bark, and plant stems. A stripped bush might reveal browsing animals nearby, while cracked shells or scattered seeds could point toward birds, rodents, or primates. The condition of a carcass warned ancient humans about predators, since fresh bite marks or missing flesh could mean the hunter was still close. Circling birds above the landscape might reveal a dead animal, but they could also expose the location of predators feeding below. Ancient humans watched living animals just as carefully because prey often detected danger before people could see it. When antelope raised their heads together and stared toward one direction, hunters knew something unusual had entered their awareness. Bird alarm calls could identify danger from the ground, the trees, or the sky, depending on which species was calling and how it sounded. Small animals fleeing through grass might reveal the movement of a snake, predator, or unfamiliar human hidden from view. Experienced hunters learned not only individual calls, but also the chain reaction created when fear moved across the landscape. One bird might cry first, then monkeys become restless, and finally grazing animals begin running before the predator appeared. By following this sequence, ancient humans could estimate where danger was moving and avoid crossing directly into its path. Animal behavior also helped people locate water, because repeated tracks often converged toward rivers, springs, ponds, and muddy depressions. Fresh tracks from several species moving in the same direction strongly suggested that a dependable water source existed nearby. However, those routes could also attract predators, so ancient humans approached carefully and watched for signs of hidden danger. Reading animals was never only about hunting them, because their movements revealed water, weather, predators, seasons, and changes across the land. But animals were only one part of nature's language, because plants, soil, and water carried equally important messages for anyone who knew where to look. Ancient humans learned that plants were not simply food or decoration, because their color, shape, growth, and location revealed hidden conditions beneath the ground. A cluster of healthy green plants in dry country could suggest moisture below the surface, even when no river or pond was visible nearby. Certain trees grew only where their roots could reach dependable water, allowing travelers to search beneath nearby soil or follow the vegetation downhill. Reeds, rushes, and thick grasses often marked marshes, springs, or seasonal channels hidden behind rocks and low ground. Ancient humans also watched animal tracks around these plants, confirming whether the area truly held water or only remained green after earlier rain. Dry riverbeds still contained useful clues, because darker soil, damp sand, insects, and deep-rooted trees could reveal water beneath the surface. A skilled traveler might dig where a channel narrowed or curved, finding moisture trapped below layers of apparently dry sand. Rocks provided information as well, since cool shaded cracks, dark stains, moss, and tiny insects sometimes marked places where water slowly collected. Morning dew gathered on grass and leaves, offering small amounts of moisture and showing which parts of the landscape cooled most strongly overnight. Ancient humans noticed how soil changed beneath their feet, because soft ground, clay, mud, and cracked earth each described different amounts of water. Dark soil could suggest rich organic material, while pale, dusty ground often warned that plants and surface water would be limited. The smell of soil also mattered, especially after digging, because damp earth carried a different scent from dry sand or sun-baked clay. By touching the ground, people could feel whether moisture remained below the surface even when the top layer looked completely dry. Plant growth revealed more than water, because it also helped ancient humans understand which kinds of soil could support food. Areas filled with edible roots, fruits, seeds, or nuts became remembered parts of a mental map revisited during the correct season. A tree that appeared empty during one journey might become an important food source months later, so people remembered its location rather than ignoring it. Flowers often appeared before fruit, giving gatherers an early warning that food would soon become available in that area. Changing leaf colors, falling seeds, and new shoots helped communities recognize when one season was ending and another was beginning. Ancient humans watched these cycles closely because arriving too early wasted energy, while arriving too late meant animals had already eaten the harvest. Some plants warned of danger through smell, thorns, bitter sap, unusual color, or the absence of feeding marks from animals. If insects, birds, and grazing animals consistently avoided a plant, people had another reason to approach it carefully. Knowledge of poisonous and medicinal plants came through observation, teaching, and sometimes costly mistakes remembered for generations. Ancient humans also noticed which plants returned after fire, which grew after floods, and which appeared only in disturbed ground. These patterns revealed recent events even when the fire, storm, or human activity had happened long before anyone arrived. Flattened grass and broken stems could show where animals had rested, while freshly cut plants might reveal that another human group had passed nearby. The height of vegetation helped estimate how recently a path had been used, because young shoots slowly rose again after being crushed. Water itself carried messages through its color, smell, movement, temperature, and the creatures living around it. Clear flowing water was usually safer than stagnant pools, but ancient humans still inspected tracks, dead animals, algae, and unusual smells before drinking. A quiet pool surrounded by many healthy animals might be useful, while silence and rotting vegetation could signal danger beneath the surface. By reading plants, soil, rocks, and water together, ancient humans transformed an unfamiliar landscape into a network of clues. Yet many of those clues became difficult to see after sunset, when hearing, smell, and the movement of air became even more important. When darkness covered the landscape, ancient humans could no longer depend mainly on sight, so sound became one of their most valuable survival tools. A familiar forest had its own normal rhythm of insects, birds, frogs, wind, and moving water continuing through the night. Because people heard these sounds repeatedly, they quickly noticed when one disappeared, changed direction, or became unusually intense. Sudden silence could mean that a predator had entered the area, causing smaller animals to hide before humans detected the danger. A single alarm call might reveal whether the threat moved through the trees, across the ground, or high above the canopy. Ancient humans learned which animals reacted to snakes, large cats, birds of prey, and unfamiliar people approaching their territory. They did not need to see the threat immediately, because the reactions of other creatures helped them locate what remained hidden. The direction of a call mattered as much as the sound itself, allowing listeners to estimate where danger had appeared and how quickly it moved. When several birds cried from one side of the forest, people could turn their attention there before anything entered the open ground. Different surfaces changed sound, so footsteps on dry leaves, wet mud, stone, and grass each carried their own recognizable pattern. A heavy animal moved differently from a small one, while hurried steps sounded different from calm movement through the darkness. Ancient humans could also hear branches breaking at different heights, revealing whether something crawled low or pushed through vegetation with a large body. The rhythm of movement helped distinguish an animal from wind, because living creatures paused, changed speed, and avoided obstacles irregularly. Water provided another kind of sound map, guiding travelers toward rivers, springs, and waterfalls when darkness hid the landscape. The strength and direction of flowing water helped people judge whether it was nearby, below them, or hidden beyond rocks and trees. Echoes inside caves and narrow valleys revealed distance, shape, and open space, helping people move carefully without seeing every obstacle. A voice returning quickly suggested closed walls, while a longer echo could reveal a larger chamber or a distant cliff. Smell became equally important because wind carried information from places beyond the reach of eyes and ears. The scent of smoke could reveal another camp, a wildfire, or people traveling somewhere beyond the visible horizon. Animal odors warned of nearby herds, predators, nesting places, or carcasses that might attract dangerous scavengers. The smell of damp vegetation and soil could lead toward water, while rotting scents warned of stagnant pools or dead animals. Ancient humans constantly checked wind direction because the same air carrying information toward them could also carry their scent toward prey or enemies. Hunters often approached from downwind, reducing the chance that animals would smell them before they came close enough to strike. If the wind shifted unexpectedly, a careful hunter might stop or change direction rather than continue with a plan that had become dangerous. Moving air also revealed the shape of the land, since cool drafts could flow from caves, river valleys, and shaded openings. A faint breeze in a still forest might indicate an open path, hidden entrance, or drop in the ground ahead. Temperature changes on the skin helped people recognize when they entered low valleys, exposed ridges, damp areas, or sheltered spaces. Ancient humans combined sound, smell, wind, and temperature into a mental map that remained useful even when darkness removed familiar visual landmarks. This skill was not created during one hunt, because it developed through years of careful listening and repeated correction. To understand why ancient humans became so skilled at reading these signals, you must look at how they learned from childhood and what happened when they failed. Ancient humans became skilled at reading nature because learning began in childhood and continued through nearly every activity of daily life. Children followed adults while gathering food, carrying water, checking traps, and moving between camps, absorbing lessons through constant exposure. They watched where experienced people placed their feet, which plants they avoided, and why they suddenly stopped to listen. An elder might point toward bent grass or a distant bird call, then explain what had passed and what danger might remain nearby. These lessons were not separated into classrooms because the landscape itself provided the examples, tests, and consequences. A child who misunderstood a track could be corrected immediately when the real animal appeared farther along the trail. Seeing the connection between a small sign and a real event made the lesson stronger than simply hearing an explanation. Repeated exposure slowly trained the brain to recognize patterns automatically, without needing to examine every clue from the beginning. What looked like instinct was often thousands of remembered experiences working together faster than conscious thought. Ancient humans also learned through imitation, copying the movements, pauses, and attention of people who had survived many difficult seasons. They noticed that skilled hunters did not rush blindly forward, but stopped often to compare sounds, wind, tracks, and vegetation. Patience became part of survival because moving too quickly could destroy footprints, reveal human scent, or hide subtle warnings. Mistakes had immediate consequences, which made people remember them more deeply than errors with no real cost. Following the wrong trail could waste precious energy, while misreading water signs might leave the entire group thirsty far from safety. Ignoring alarm calls could lead people toward predators, and misunderstanding weather signs could trap travelers without shelter. Because one person's mistake could endanger everyone, knowledge was corrected, discussed, and shared across the group. A successful hunter returned not only with food, but also with information about animal movements, water, strangers, and changes in the land. Gatherers reported where fruits were ripening, which plants had disappeared, and whether insects suggested that seasonal conditions were shifting. Travelers described flooded paths, fresh fires, fallen trees, and tracks from unfamiliar groups beyond the normal territory. By combining these observations, the community built a larger understanding than any single person could create alone. Older people became especially valuable because they could compare current conditions with rare events remembered from decades earlier. A younger hunter might see an ordinary dry riverbed, while an elder remembered how quickly that same channel flooded after distant rain. Knowledge accumulated across generations, allowing children to begin with lessons their ancestors had already paid to discover. Ancient humans also knew their local environment intimately because they traveled through the same valleys, ridges, rivers, and feeding grounds repeatedly. They knew which sounds belonged there, which plants grew in each season, and where animals normally crossed at dawn. This familiarity made unusual changes stand out immediately, just as you notice when something in your own home has been moved. Modern people often enter nature as visitors, seeing everything as unfamiliar and therefore struggling to separate ordinary patterns from meaningful changes. Ancient humans lived inside those patterns every day, so the landscape became as recognizable as faces within their own group. Their attention was also less fragmented because there were fewer artificial signals constantly demanding that they look away from the environment. Reading nature was not a hobby, practiced occasionally, because it shaped where they walked, slept, hunted, gathered, and protected their children. Every day strengthened the skill, every mistake refined it, and every shared lesson carried it forward into the next generation. Yet this ability was never lost from the human brain, because modern people still carry the same capacity beneath habits built around technology. Modern humans still possess the same basic senses and pattern recognition abilities, but those skills weaken when they are rarely used. A person who depends entirely on maps may stop noticing the slope of the land, the position of the sun, or the direction of flowing water. Someone who checks a weather app may ignore cloud movement, changing wind, and the sudden silence that often appears before a storm. Technology has made life safer and more convenient, but it can also place a screen between people and the environment surrounding them. Ancient humans had no choice but to watch nature closely, while modern people can often survive without understanding what happens outside their buildings. This difference does not mean ancient people were more intelligent, because their daily lives simply trained a different form of attention. The human brain becomes efficient at whatever it practices, whether that means tracking animals through mud or navigating crowded digital information. When observation is repeated every day, tiny details become meaningful. But when it is neglected, even obvious signals can disappear into the background. You can begin rebuilding this ability by slowing down and noticing what remains consistent in one familiar outdoor place. Listen to which birds call in the morning, where shadows fall, how the wind moves leaves, and which insects appear after rain. At first, these details may seem unrelated, but repeated observation gradually reveals patterns that were always present. You may notice that certain birds become louder before sunrise, while others disappear when a predator moves nearby. You may see that one path remains damp longer than another, revealing hidden shade, lower ground, or water beneath the soil. You may recognize that wind regularly arrives from one direction before afternoon clouds begin forming over distant hills. None of these observations require abandoning science, because scientific knowledge can help explain the patterns your senses detect. Modern forecasting can warn you about a storm, while direct observation can show how that storm is already changing your immediate surroundings. A digital map can guide your route, while attention to ridges, rivers, sunlight, and landmarks helps you understand where you actually are. Technology is most useful when it strengthens awareness rather than replacing it completely. Ancient humans understood nature locally, learning one valley, forest, coastline, or grassland with extraordinary depth. They did not know every plant or animal in the world, but they often knew the important relationships within the land they depended on. Modern people can recover part of that connection by learning the ordinary rhythms of the places they visit repeatedly. Once you know what normal sounds like, silence becomes information, and once you know ordinary tracks, a fresh disturbance becomes a story. The natural world slowly changes from a collection of objects into a network of movement, warning, memory, and opportunity. A bird is no longer only a bird, because its direction, call, and behavior may reveal what is happening beyond your sight. A patch of green plants is no longer only vegetation, because it may indicate water, shade, rich soil, or seasonal change. A broken branch is no longer random damage, because its height, direction, and freshness may reveal what recently passed through. This was the world ancient humans experienced, not because nature spoke in words, but because every living thing responded to everything around it. Their survival depended on noticing those responses, remembering them, and acting before danger became impossible to avoid. The lesson is not to romanticize ancient life, which was often uncertain, exhausting, and dangerous. The lesson is to remember that human attention can become remarkably powerful when it is focused on the real world for long enough. Ancient humans were better at reading nature because they spent their entire lives learning its language, while modern people often stop listening. But that language has never disappeared, and the moment you begin paying attention, the world starts speaking again.